Imagine being a normal high school student with a very boring life. But one day, some jerk sends you off to meet God. But it doesn't end there. Luckily, there was a necromancer nearby and she turns you into a zombie. Wait, what? This is what happened to our protagonist, and now he wants revenge. But first he has to learn a couple of things about his new world. And along the way, he would meet some bonkers waifus that would turn his life upside down. On a rainy day, Ayumu Ekawa heads to school because even though he's an undead, he leads a pretty normal life. And when he gets home, he encounters EU, who decided to live with him for some strange reason, who treats him like a servant, although the guy treats her like a younger sister. At night, the dude goes out to look for his killer, but since he never finds him, he goes to relax in the cemetery. But that night wasn't like the others, because suddenly a magical girl appeared who fights a kind of monster bear, and since he was in the middle, the bear pierced him with its claws. But this didn't faze the waifu because she pierced him with her chainsaw to annihilate the bear, and well, she's surprised to see he's still alive, but when she finds out he's a zombie, she tries to erase his memory, but accidentally he ends up absorbing her powers, and well, he ended up as naked as the day he was born, so the waifu ends up living with him until everything is resolved. After classes, his best friend wants to go see a movie because he thinks Ayumu lives alone, but he refuses, as he doesn't want anyone to find out that he's now living with two beautiful waifus. Although he didn't give any explanations, his friend thought it wasn't right for him to live alone. At that moment, a megalo enters the classroom looking like a normal guy at first glance, but when Haruna appears, the creature turns into a giant lobster. It is attracted to the magic they possess. However, since the magical girl doesn't have much strength, she can't defeat the beast, so the guy tries with all his might to finish off the lobster, but it's not enough, so he recites the waifu spell to become a super rag, despite that it worked, since with the chainsaw he funo the lobster. At that moment, the guy realized he had broken through the window, and now he was in the middle of many students, and to make things worse, the waifu tells him that he's going to be a magical girl now. Luckily, he was able to use his powers to erase that from their minds. If you want to know the name of this anime, it will appear down here during the video, so leave in the comments the exact minute it appears to send you a little heart. A week later, the protagonist went to school as if nothing had happened, because with his new powers he not only erased everyone's minds but also fixed everything he broke during the fight. Besides, he's also getting used to his new life, and at lunchtime, the magical girl had prepared several types of eggs for him, as that's the only thing she knows how to make, but at least they turned out super delicious, so much so that the whole class tried them without even asking her. When he gets home, the protagonist thanks the magical girl but would like her to put some rice next time, causing her to be offended, so he tells her that he will bring eggs every day. However, he asks her to make something to eat, so she makes dinner for everyone, and at that moment, they are joined by a strange woman named Seraphim, who claims to be a vampire ninja, and her mission is to take the necromancer to her village voluntarily, but she refuses, so she asks the guy to send her home. This piques the vampire's curiosity about who he is. Although the guy says he's her brother, the waifu writes that he's her servant, so the woman wants to be his servant, but he refuses because he already has a servant. For that reason, the vampire challenges him to a fight and the winner gets to keep the girl. Later, they go to the cemetery, and after a while of fighting, the zombie wins, but still, the vampire stays to live in his house, saying that now she's going to be a servant. However, she doesn't intend to do anything he orders. In a scene change, we are shown a memory from a month ago, before the boy became a zombie. It turns out that one night the boy went to buy some things at the store when he saw the albino girl, and so the boy tried to get her attention by dropping the forbidden moves, which strangely worked, and even though she only communicates with notes, they had a good time, and when the boy was heading home he heard some screams. Then he remembered that there's a killer loose in the city, so he enters the house to help, but then a man pierces him with a sword. Later, the boy wakes up in the cemetery, and that's where he finds out he's going to be a zombie and that the waifu will move in with him. The next morning, everyone has breakfast and talks calmly. At that moment, the magical girl gives the zombie his lunch and asks if this time it comes with rice with the eggs, but she shouts at him to serve it himself and to die, causing the albino to get upset, and she asks her not to say that word, but the waifu doesn't listen and says it again, and without saying anything, the necromancer stands up and slaps her because she believes that dying is painful and should not be wished upon anyone. Days later, the magical girl dreams that she defeats many megalos, but as she's hungry, a pudding unconsciously arrives in her dreams as if it were a creature, but she can't eat it. Suddenly, a strange alarm clock hits her on the head, so she breaks it. At breakfast, we learn that the zombie's parents are always traveling and constantly send him strange gifts, like the waifu's alarm clock. As the guy goes to school, the girls fight over the last pudding, but at least not aggressively, but with board games, but since they all have their own abilities, they always tie. At school, the guy's friend named Dorito invites him to bowling, and since he had been rejected by every woman he invited, he felt obligated to go. Upon arriving, the trio of waifus are there, as they thought that with that game, one of them would win the pudding, and when the guy realizes that they were there, he wanted to flee because he didn't want them to find out that he lives with 3 girls, let alone think he has a harem, but the 4 eyes stopped him, and just then the girls approach, and well, they end up telling him that they live with our protagonist, causing him to faint faint from the shock. However, he comes up with the idea that if he wins at bowling, he'll move in with all of them, but the guy wins, leaving him flabbergasted. Then he receives a message from a girl and asks the zombie to accompany him to the hospital. Upon arriving at the hospital, the Four Eyes informs him that the girl is like his sister and that she was one of the victims of the killer, and upon entering the room, the girl blushes as apparently she was quite fond of the zombie. After a while, Arito goes to look for a vase, so the guy takes the opportunity to ask her if she saw the person who did this to her. She describes the person, who coincidentally looks like the albino, but until he's sure, he didn't say anything. At that moment, we learn that the jerk killed the waifu's parents, and now she'll have to go live with her grandfather. Meanwhile, the vampire and the magical girl were still fighting over the pudding, but without realizing it, the albino was already eating it. The next morning, the magical girl set out to make a meal that wasn't eggs, and it was going well, until the vampire wanted to help. She made the food so deadly that it melted everything it touched. Still, the guy took a bit to make her feel better. If he weren't a zombie, he'd probably have passed to the other side by now. With no other option, he had to order a pizza. Later, there was a knock on the door, and the guy opened it, thinking it was the delivery person. Instead, it was Cerberus, the underworld's guard dog. He had come to take him to the underworld, but upon seeing the albino, he left him alone and apologized. If it had been known that she had brought him back, he would never have appeared. After that, the dog wanted to go collect the soul of a new victim of the killer, and when the guy heard, he accompanied him to the place. At that moment, the dog told him he was very lucky, as they discovered that when the albino revived or healed him, she felt the same pain he did. Upon arriving at the victim's house, Cerberus said the soul wasn't there. Apparently, it had been used as an offering to the king of the night to gain more power. Just when the rumor was about to cost him, they heard the sound of a sword, and although the dog tried to intervene to prevent the zombie from being hurt, he couldn't. The sword pierced both of them, but he ended up disappearing. When the zombie finally made it home, he told the albino everything that had happened. He also wanted to know more about who she was, and well, that's when we find out that the waifu's powers are stronger than she is, and they go out of control if she has any strong feelings. Moreover, just by talking to someone, she can cast a spell unintentionally. That's why she doesn't speak. And as if that weren't enough, her powers will keep working after her death. After telling her everything, the albino thinks the guy hates her for being a monster, but that's not the case. Despite everything, he loves her and will face anything to be with her. The next day, a megalith in the shape of a whale arrives in the city, so the vampire and the zombie start to fight. But as it needs more strength, it transforms into a super rag, and with the help of the ninja vampy, they manage to defeat the creature. The next night, the vampire convinces the magical girl to drink her blood, but first, she steals a kiss from him, as it acts as anesthesia so the bite won't hurt. That's why he wanted to try it, but she refuses. While they were talking, the magical girl was in her room trying to regain her magic, but every time she tried, she ended up as God brought her into the world. At that moment, the zombie wanted to enter her room to tell her that the food was ready, but she closed it before he could see her. However, as she didn't want the food to get cold, she forced the door open, and upon seeing her, he apologized, but she kicked him out. The next day, the trio of waifus go to shower together while the guy washes the dishes. Suddenly, his phone rings, and when he answers, it's the magical girl's teacher, as she wanted to know if she had gotten what she asked for. This was to go to Kyoto for Kyotofu, but instead, she went to Tokyo. Upon realizing the confusion, the zombie promised to help her. Just as he finished speaking with the magical girl's teacher, his phone rang again. This time, it was Kyoko, Arito's friend. At that moment, he remembered that the waifu's grandfather was from Kyoto, so he asked her the favor of bringing him some, and since she had coincidentally just left the hospital, they agreed to meet the next day. In the morning, the protagonist waits for classes to end to meet with the blonde, because sunlight hurts him, so he waits until night to see her. In a scene change, the guy says goodbye to his friends to go to the cemetery, but for some strange reason, the albino didn't want him to go. Still, he tells her to calm down and asks the magical girl to accompany him, because after all, the favor is for her. She refuses, but when the zombie leaves, he realizes that she's following him. Upon arriving at the cemetery, the blonde gives him what he asked for, so the zombie asks her how much it costs to repay her, but she only wants something in return. His soul. Wait, what? At that moment, we learn that the blonde has been manipulating Arito's mind to make him think they've been friends for life. Additionally, she's also a magical girl, and as the icing on the cake, she's the city's killer. So, to justify herself, she says she wants to be immortal, and to achieve that, she needs many human souls. Thus, since she sees the zombie as an obstacle, she wants to end his life. At that moment, the magical girl and the vampire appear, as the albino sent them to help the protagonist. However, since the little girl doesn't have her powers, she only covers some of the blonde's attacks. So, everything is left in the hands of the zombie and the vampire, but first, he has to transform into a super rag to defeat her, and after a good teamwork, the vampire manages to pierce her. But it's not over yet, as the woman possesses many souls. She quickly heals herself, and before they realize it, she pierces the vampire. At that moment, the albino appears. Apparently that was what she wanted, as she wants to steal his powers. But the waifu is stronger and withstands every spell she throws at him. Additionally, she becomes a magical girl to become stronger, and to avoid hurting her friends, she distances herself as much as she can. Despite the blonde using all her power and hurting herself in the process, it doesn't even tickle her. Instead, just a word from her mouth leaves her near death. However, because she had stolen so many lives, she survives. Realizing that she loses more lives by hearing her, she breaks her own eardrums. To gain an advantage, she approaches her closely enough to use all her strength to unleash a power that only knocks her out. Her friends only watch from afar, but seeing the albino on the ground, they decide to attack, but she handles them all. To regain her strength, she pierces herself. With no other option, she turns back into a magical girl and accepts that she is the albino's servant. And although it seemed not to work at first, she was just getting closer and closer to break her sword. After giving her many attacks with the chainsaw, they finally managed to take away all the lives she had stolen, leaving her with only her own. After a while, the albino wakes up, thanking them for their help. And as she wakes up hungry, she asks them to make her a big dinner. At that moment, the magical girl's teacher Dai arrives, worried about her other student. Then the zombie reproaches her for not having properly educated the blonde. But as the teacher has millions of students, she justifies that she can't educate them all, and that she only came for the kyotofu they promised her. Just then, the blonde wakes up, but this time she has a man's voice. It's the king of the night who had possessed the poor girl, and he assures them that all that fighting wasn't a threat to EU, and then he leaves. The next day, everything seemed fine, but the guy couldn't stop thinking about that man. So he asks the albino if he too was a zombie, and she tells him yes, as many years ago he was her servant, but when he became filled with darkness, she took his life. The days passed, but as the kid had been distracted by everything that had happened, he had been struggling a bit in school. So, since he didn't want to attend summer classes, he asked his friends for help. Although the magical girl tried, she didn't know much about mathematics. On the other hand, the albino girl did. When the exams arrived, he was completely prepared to take them, but at that moment he realized that the magical girl was at work, tapping on the window of his classroom to hurry him up, as she had to defeat a megalo. After classes, the zombie called home to find out where the megalo was. When they gave him the address, he realized he had to walk several kilometers under the sun. So he ran as fast as possible towards the nearest shade. At that moment, the teacher called him to ask for a favor. She wanted him to take care of something for a while, but she didn't say what it was. Nevertheless, he agreed. Upon arriving at the location, he saw that the waifu was in trouble. So he rushed to help, but as more creatures arrived, it became complicated to fight alone. At that moment, a boy arrived who defeated every megalo there with ramen. Before they could thank him, the vampire girl arrived. Turned out that he too was a vampire, but from the opposition, named Maelstrom. The zombie didn't care because the boy had saved their lives, so he tried to help him. However, as the magical girl felt ignored, she pushed him, causing the kid to fall on top of him, and accidentally they kissed. When the guy was thinking that his first kiss was with another boy, he realized that his hand was on something soft. It was the waifu's bust line. Turned out he wasn't a man but a woman. Later, the vampire and the zombie went to a secret ramen factory to find out why it killed the megalos. However, they never found out why. Instead, they were shown a machine that shoots ramen throughout the city whenever one of those creatures appears. But this wouldn't be very good for the ecosystem, but at least they ate some. Although Male was acting somewhat strange, everything was fine. But when they left, they found out why, because in vampire culture, if a man kisses a woman, they are married instantly regardless of anything else. Upon returning home, the albino and the magical girl were outside putting up the Christmas tree, and well, she told him a somewhat strange story about a macabre Santa who grants wishes if he has a Christmas tree. But despite that story, everyone had a good time. The next morning, the zombie goes to school, and before classes begin, a girl approaches him to give him the thing the teacher had asked him to take care of. It was a pair of glasses. Before the kid could try them on, Male arrived. She had made him lunch because she finds it very normal for a wife to make lunch for her husband. The zombie tried to clarify that the kiss was an accident, and although she understands, she accepts responsibility. Besides, she has always wanted to get married. At that moment, Arito arrives. When he greets the waifu, he calls her by another name, making her annoyed. At that moment, they find out that the girl has another name at school, Yoshida Yuki, but when written, it sounds totally different. Although this is all kind of complicated, the protagonist understands the confusion, but it only makes the girl more upset, and he puts on the glasses so she can read the name properly. But it was a terrible decision because those glasses show what they have under their clothes. As the protagonist left class, he was very happy, enjoying the landscape, but his fantasy ended when he saw the vampire, as the glasses are for her, and when he realized what he was seeing, she got upset. The next morning, morning, the magical girl dreamed that she was displaying her attributes while the zombie kissed her. Upon waking up, she was very upset and kicked him awake before going to make breakfast. At school, everyone was talking about how delicious the zombie's lunch was, which caught the blonde's attention, so she thought of asking a girl who studied in the same class as him to teach her how to make him like her. After class, the girls went to eat to talk quietly. Kanami advised her to cook for him, thinking that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, but warned her that she would have competition because his food is always very good. She also suggested that the zombie stop speaking so masculinely and try to be more like a loli, and finally, she should try to get closer to him. The blonde saw all of this as a challenge to overcome, so she had no problem with it. After all this, they noticed that the other girl who accompanied them for lunch was paying close attention. At lunchtime, the blonde brought him what she had prepared, and although it looked good, the waifu seasoned it in a way that made it look disgusting. However, since the boy is so kind, he ate it. While all this was happening, Kanami and her friend watched, the latter looking somewhat disappointed for not having given the food to the zombie first. At home, the vampire was hanging out the clean laundry when an arrow came in her direction, but she immediately caught it and realized it had a letter, although nothing was written on it visibly. The message only appeared when she put on the glasses. In the afternoon, the blonde waited for the protagonist to go home together and take advantage of the opportunity to get closer to him, but he only wants to be her friend. He tried to explain again that the kiss was an accident, but she repeated that it was his responsibility and that she would do her best to fall in love with him. Just then, the magical girl appeared, looking somewhat jealous to see them together, so the zombie apologized to keep things peaceful and promised to take her somewhere fun. Although she thought it would be just the two of them, his wife joined them later, and the boy thought about inviting the vampire and the necromancer. Over the weekend, they all went to a shopping mall and spent pleasant moments shopping, as everything was paid by the boy, and after a while, they went to eat. In the evening, the magical girl approached the boy while he was buying drinks to ask him to kiss her. He refused because he didn't think it was a good idea, which made her upset, and she started hitting him. In a scene change, the albino is playing with her new dolls while everyone else is distracted. Suddenly, a strange man appears, and both of them disappear. When the others realize this, they become worried, and the vampire thinks it was her superiors because the note they sent her that day was orders to get rid of the albino, but she has no intention of complying. Turns out that the weird kid is the first zombie that the albino girl created, and he wants her to fulfill a wish. To ensure that she does, he puts his friends in trouble. First, he makes the Ferris wheel fall on the guy, and then he causes the waifu's powers to go out of control, accidentally turning a toy into a megalo. This creature grabbed the magical girl and crushed her, and although everyone helped to get her out, the creature didn't move. Then the teacher appeared near the albino girl. She helped move the creature because she can't stand to see harm come to one of her students. But this caused the beast to fall on the blonde, causing her to unconsciously summon a kind of giant armor. To help her, the guy transformed into a magical girl. Although his friends wanted to help defeat it, he reminded them that she is his friend, so he asked them to let him go alone. At that moment, the girl regained consciousness, but doing so activated the self-destruct mode. So she asked the zombie to leave because otherwise he would blow up too. But he didn't care as he approached and hugged her. This seemed to work because the armor disappeared. While all this was happening, the albino girl didn't want them to suffer, so she asked the king of the night to leave them alone. But he did nothing and reminded her that if she had strong emotions, her powers would go out of control. Besides, he confessed that she is the messenger of death, and everything she does will have an effect on her friends. And well, he decided to leave, but before that, he reminded her to fulfill his wish. Then he made lightning strike the guy, finally disappearing, causing the teacher to disappear too to pursue him. In a scene change, the albino girl approaches her friends as if nothing had happened, but they only care that she is okay. So they didn't pay attention to her and went home, but on the way, the necromancer wants the others to go ahead so she can enter the store where she met the protagonist. Although he wants to accompany her, she refuses. Upon arriving home, the guy finds the waifu's notebook where she says goodbye to everyone because she doesn't want to harm them. And although the guy runs to the store where she was supposed to be, she had disappeared. Although they were all sad, they won't give up until they see her again. Some time had passed since the albino girl's disappearance, and everyone had split up to search on their own. Despite searching everywhere, the zombie found nothing. The magical girl and the vampire also had no luck. The vampire, although tempted to lie, confessed that all she found was trouble with her clan. Returning to her village, everyone treated her as a traitor for not fulfilling her mission. At that moment, a delivery person knocked on the door, not with pasta as the magical girl expected, but with a violin. It seemed he had dialed the wrong number, calling the king of pasta instead of the king of the violin. However, on the bright side, the vampire knew how to play the violin very well. Though they had no leads, they refused to give up and continued their search. One night, the zombie went to the store where where he and the albino girl had met. Suddenly, a man approached a lady to inquire about her dog, as he seemed to be a veterinarian. However, as the lady walked away, she realized who he truly was. Finding it curious that he wasn't with the albino girl, the king of the night decided to use him as bait. Things worsened when their friends arrived because the zombie also wanted to use them. He started hurting them, but suddenly Mail arrived with the vampire who had brought glasses to the guy the other time, saving their lives. When the king of the night found himself surrounded, he had no choice but to escape, but before he left, he expressed his wish for the albino girl to grant him the wish to die. All the vampires, except Seraphim, went after the king of the night, while the magical girl and the blonde tried to help the zombie, who had lost his legs due to the attacks. However, the girls mistakenly attached the legs backward, so the magical girl had to carry him home while Mail and the vampire continued searching. The next day, the blonde and the other vampires had a clue about where the albino girl might be, and unknowingly, she was right at her doorstep. At that moment, the vampire arrived but was attacked by the king of the night. Although badly injured, the albino girl healed her before leaving with the man. When the vampire woke up, she told her friends everything that had happened, so the protagonist and the magical girl went to the place Mail had mentioned. Upon arrival, the albino girl was sitting calmly, and the man invited them to eat quietly. Apparently, he wanted to talk calmly, but when all the vampires arrived, he had to go with the albino girl. However, before leaving, he attached an explosive to the magical girl's head. In an attempt to disarm it, the waifu hugged the blonde so that the bomb would transfer to her head. When they couldn't defuse it, the zombie hugged the girl and jumped out the window with the bomb, thus preventing it from harming their friends. Although he was completely dismembered, the girls searched for all his parts to put them together, but still he didn't wake up, so the magic girl had to call her teacher to help them. At that moment, we realized that the protagonist was in a struggle. He imagined that his friends hated him and wanted to disappear. However, thanks to Senpai Haruna, she managed to enter his mind and make him see reason, not to give up. At that moment, the girl with red eyes appears to give him a uniform because it turns out there's a way to close the connection with the megalo, which is to play the violin, but only a vampire who has drunk the blood of the necromancer can do it, meaning only she can. Suddenly, everyone feels the presence of a giant megalo, and they think it must be the work of the king of the night, so everyone goes to a tower where it is supposed to appear. Upon arrival, they see the albino with the king of the night, who keeps asking her to take his life, but she refuses. Because of this, he made her summon a giant megalo to destroy the city and her friends. Despite this, she continues to refuse. Then the zombie and Haruna become magical girls to defeat him, but even though they were very close, they couldn't even touch him, and the girl was thrown out of a window. Meanwhile, the vampire played the violin at the top of the tower to defeat the creature coming from the sky, but as she keeps summoning more and more megalos, it becomes more difficult for her to defeat them. So, with the support of all her vampire friends, she gained the strength to defeat them little by little. In a scene change, we see the zombies fighting with all their might, and that's where we learn that the king of the night wants to die because he has lived for too long and the world has lost its color. He warned that this is what will happen with time. He will tire of being alive. However, the protagonist doesn't believe so, as he thinks that being with the necromancer, the magic girl, and the vampire will be okay. But the king of the night doesn't believe he understands what he's saying, or that he knows the albino better than he does. This disgusts the protagonist because he's sure that even though they have known each other for many years, he doesn't understand her like he does, and right there he pierces his head. At that moment, we realize that the man is just tired and has done all that so that the albino can relieve all the pain he felt. For the last time, he asks her to take his life, and when she brings him back, to do it as a penguin because he loves them. This time, she agrees. After that, the protagonist takes the opportunity to ask her to come back home, that he doesn't care if she doesn't want to. He won't let her go until she promises never to leave his side. And there we finally hear the beautiful voice of the albino, as she always wanted someone to be selfish for her. Going back to the vampire, she was able to close the portal of the megalos and defeat all that had appeared. With everyone happily back home, the girl gets excited about winning tickets to the water park, so she invites all her friends. Upon arriving at the pool, the girls showed off their swimsuits, although the magic girl didn't like that the vampire wore so little, but she hoped that her assets would grow. At that moment, the blonde arrived with her friends. It seemed like a coincidence, but the waifu wanted to believe it was destiny. After that, they all went to play while the protagonist enjoyed the scenery. But when the vampire noticed, she was bothered by how weird he was. So, to escape from all the drama with her friends, she went for a walk. But then she saw many people listening to a concert being performed by the girl with red eyes. This seemed to bother the vampire because apparently her code didn't allow it. For that reason, she didn't hesitate to get on stage to try to convince her to come down. But she explained that being an idol is the best way to fight like a ninja vampire, implying that since there are no more megalos in the world, they have to find other things to do. At that moment, the vampire teacher unwittingly found herself in competition with the idol hopeful. Next to the protagonist was Arito, who was watching the show while showing the place of the candidates. Suddenly, everything had turned into a full concert with the two girls singing to defeat each other. And when the magic girl realized all this, she almost fainted from envy. So she also joined the competition. The waifu, just with her shining entrance, rose to the first place and remained there with her rock song, leaving everyone completely surprised. The albino watched her friends shine and also wanted to, but her power didn't allow it. At that moment, the girl's teacher appeared with a machine that absorbs someone's power and transfers it to another for an hour. And if Iu uses it, she can share her magic with the zombie. So that's exactly what they did to give her the opportunity to sing. But hers wasn't as wild as her friends. Instead, she sang softly, making all her friends proud of her, especially the guy who, when he expressed his happiness, felt immense pain because he was supposed to keep the albino's vow of silence. Everything was going well until time ran out and the waifu couldn't finish her song. But the magic girl helped her do it. By taking her hand, she gave her the strength to sing again, and he returned to having the vow of silence. Meanwhile, the vampires only danced beneath her, as the girl with red eyes said, "Being an idol is a battle." Meanwhile, the protagonist observed the chestiness of the vampires and couldn't help but think out loud that he would like all women to wear very small swimsuits, and since he accidentally has the albino's powers, his wish came true, making everyone very upset. Days passed, everything was completely normal. The girls continued to live with the zombie, and he couldn't be happier to be with his new family, where they wait for him every night to eat. If you like this anime, don't forget to leave a like and write the word zombie in the comments.